Now, when we think of this in relation to the parable of the prodigal son, we might make a little bit of a kind of change in the story. Let's imagine that parable differently. Let's imagine that that younger son, knowing the house of the father, goes off into a far country, wastes everything that he had received from the father and that he had possessed in the father's house, squandered it all, wasted it all, got involved in riotous living, and ultimately ended up among the swine. And then we can imagine in this parable that boy, young man, sitting there among the pigs. And we imagine him thinking about the house of the Father, coming to himself, as it says in St. Luke's Gospel. And we know from the parable that that boy had a palpable experience of the house of the Father. He knew what it was. He knew what it was like. He had been there. He had eaten and drunk there. He had heard the music. He had eaten the food. He had worn the clothes. He knew what it was like. And he remembered it. He had a memory of it. And then he decided that he would get up and that he would go back there. Because he had a place to go back to. He knew that it existed. He had seen it. He had experienced it. And that's what allowed him to go back. Now, suppose we imagine, hearing this parable, that we changed it a little bit. Not even a little bit. Let's imagine that we changed it quite a bit in this way. Let's imagine that the boy, the young man in the far country, remembering the house of the Father, knowing what it was, decided not to go back. Let's imagine that, I don't know, he was maybe too afraid to go back. He thought he would be rejected. Maybe he thought, oh, what's the difference anyway? I'm lost anyway. I might just as well be lost. Maybe he said, I'm dead already. I might as well be dead. And you know, lots of people have that experience. Lots of people who are caught up in wickedness and evil, they actually even think that way. They'll say, oh, I'm so bad anyway. God will never take me. What's the use of even bothering? I'm lost. I might as well really be evil and really, waste myself because I'm no good for anything anyway. That happens. But if we could imagine, just for a little exercise here, that the boy doesn't go back. And he stays in the pig pen, and he actually copulates with some of the harlots and the prostitutes there, and reproduces. That children are born in the pig pen. His own children are born there in the pig pen. With the other people who are in the pig pen, also copulating, procreating, and reproducing. Then let's imagine that this fellow grows old, and he dies in the pig pen. Biologically, physically dies. He's already been spiritually dead, but now he is physically dead. Then let's imagine that his children grow up, and they heard from time to time from their father that he had a life before the pig pen. Maybe he spoke about it once in a while. Maybe he reminisced. Maybe when he got drunk, he babbled about it or whatever. But they had some inkling that there was some other place that he had come from, that he hadn't always been in the pig pen. But then let's imagine that they grow up, and they reproduce in the pig pen, and they get old, and they die, and they have children. And now these children are a couple generations removed from the man who knew the house of the Father. Then let's imagine that they grow up, and they reproduce, and they die. And then let's imagine that all of a sudden, well, really not all of a sudden, but after this process, it does happen that there are those there who have no knowledge, even by hearsay, of any house, of any father. Suppose that all they know is the pig pen, and they think that the pig pen is it. That's their total experience, the pig pen. And then we can imagine that life in that pig pen, or existence, because it's really not life. According to the Scripture, you're only alive if you're with God. Many people exist, not many people live. But let's imagine that there's this existence in the pig pen. And then that pig pen has to get organized. You know, the pig pen is highly populated now. And then let's imagine that the people get together and say, we got to do something about this life in this pig pen. So then what happens? There develops pigpen politics, pigpen law, pigpen art, pigpen therapies. You can imagine so-called healing services of the pigpen. The books that could be written, Life in the Pigpen, How to Cope in the Pigpen, Being Happy in the Pigpen, Surviving in the Pigpen. And then there can be counseling for people who feel unhappy in the pigpen and to try to get them to come to terms with the pigpen and to accept the pigpen. And you just could imagine that there is this existence, and it would be almost impossible for anyone to know that they can get up and go back to the house of the Father. They just do not know that it even exists. Now, making this kind of a meditation, it can be relevant to our time today, because it does seem pretty clear that there are many of our brothers and sisters of the human race, people that we live with all day long and exist with, and who have no idea whatsoever of the house of the Father. And when people talk about the house of the Father, they think it's just fantasy. They think it's just the neuroses. They think that, that's just people having intimations of immortality which they don't have. Why don't they just be courageous, realistic, and face the fact that all there is the pigpen and there's nothing else, so you better make the best of it. And if you're really clever, you'll learn how even to make out in the pigpen. You'll succeed in the pigpen. You'll have all the pleasures of the pigpen at other pigpen dwellers' expenses and so on. But this is a tragic thought. Nevertheless, it does seem to be so. It does seem to be so. In his book, The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis spoke about a kind of education and a way of living where the heart of the person, he called it the Tao. He didn't want this to appear to be Christian apologetics. He was just speaking about human life when he said that we can come to such a point where we don't have the capability of intuiting anymore the true, the good, the beautiful, the divine, the house of the Father. And we have no idea that it's even there. There's nothing else but the pigpen. So we Christians, or would-be Christians, or alleged Christians, we have to thank God that at least to some measure we know the house of the Father. And some of us would claim to know it pretty deeply, pretty immediately, because we know the life of the church. We know the scriptures and the sacraments and the services and the saints. We have the icons. We have all graces. We have the Lenten season. We have the communion table. We have the beautiful vestments and robes that God puts upon us. We have the music and the singing that it comes even together with that of the angels. We have that experience. And then when we do sin and do find ourselves in the far country, we know what we can come back to. And some church fathers actually use this parable by saying noetically, so to speak, mentally, spiritually, in our mind, we go off into that far country probably 1,000 times a day. We find ourselves many times every day with our mind out in the pigpen. We find ourselves in the pigpen forgetting the house of the Father. Then we have to remind ourselves again. And that's why some fathers say that the forgetfulness of God, the forgetfulness of the Father's house, is the cause of every sin. And that's why we should go to that house frequently, regularly, never to forget that it exists, so that we can know when we are not there, when we have betrayed it, when we are in a far country, when we are among swine, when we're in a pigpen. And then we can come back. But we also have to know and be very, very merciful that we may be living, and virtually certainly are living, with a lot of folks who haven't the foggiest idea about the house of the Father. And what they read about in the newspaper, about the people who claim to have the Father's house, their own prodigality, their own prostitution, their own pedophilia and sexual aberrations and lechery and so on, they just think it's a joke that there's a house of the Father. So even when we try to convince them that there is, especially in words, they just laugh at us. They just think that we're neurotic and crazy. But we do have this marvelous privilege, as well as the absolute commandment of God, to bear witness to the house of the Father, to other people, to testify to it. And how do we do that? We do that by showing mercy. We do that not by sending care packages to the pig pen, not by affirming pig pen life, but by acknowledging that there is the pig pen. And by acknowledging that there are some folks who don't know anything except the pig pen. And then we would beg God that we might be, for them, some kind of a presence, some kind of a sign, some kind of an indication that there really may be something else other than the pig pen. There really may be a Father. There really may be a house of the Father. There may be a place where we can go to, even if it would not be so much a returning, although it may be a returning to the house that was known by my great-great-grandfather or something, my forebearer. But we have to beg God that we could be ourselves ambassadors of the Father's house, presences, sacraments, signs, words for our brothers and sisters in the pig pen. And we Christians, we live in two realities at once. Baptized, sealed, believing, we know and belong to and live in the house of the Father. But until the Lord comes in glory, we're still living in this world. And so much of this world is fashioned and formed and ruled and governed by the pig pen. It simply is the pig pen. So we are somehow in two places at once. But one thing is for sure. We should bring the Father's house to the pig pen and not bring the pig pen into the Father's house. That we should be first and foremost children of the Father who could then show to others, more by our deeds than by our words, that there is a Father, that there is a Father's house, and that everything is not simply a pig pen.